Hey everyone, welcome to the 2021 Envirothon Aquatics section. This year we've decided to preview Alabama Watershed Stewards Program. It was produced by the Alabama Cooperative Extension System in partnership with ADEM, EPA, Alabama Water Watch, and Auburn University Water Resource Center. It's a little longer than usual, so I'm going to apologize, but it is packed with some great information. Also, we may be looking at a potential junior watershed stewards for your age range, so we just wanted to preview for you. We want to wish you good luck, and let's get to it. Here's a preview and list of the Alabama Watershed Stewards modules we used to create the videos for the aquatics section this year. It gives the time periods that you would need to complete each one. Let's go ahead and get started with the first one, Natural Watershed Functions and Features.
Hi everyone, and now I'm going to lead you through Section 4, Natural Watershed Functions and Features. So natural watershed functions include both hydrological and ecological functions. So with hydrological, we have water capture, water storage, and water release. The types of plants and soils and the geography, topography of a watershed influences how much of that water is captured and slowly infiltrated into the soil, how it's stored, and how it's slowly released back into surface or groundwater. So watersheds also provide those ecological functions, including biochemical reactions and habitat for plants and animals, which we'll talk a little bit more about. So I mentioned biogeochemical reactions. So biogeochemical cycling refers to the physical, biological, and chemical transformations of elements that are found in soil, water, and air. Many of those interactions are actually quite complex and are very important for maintaining proper watershed function. Nutrient elements such as nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus, carbon, and hydrogen, as well as organic materials containing these nutrients, are often constantly undergoing physical, biological, and chemical reactions with the surrounding environment. So these processes actually help maintain the plant and microbial communities that are found along water bodies in a watershed. Plants and microbes, in turn, fuel additional reactions and biogeochemical cycling, and those communities help maintain the global atmosphere through a complex cycle in which carbon is trapped in plant biomass, preventing its release into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, or greenhouse gas. So it's interesting to think that these watersheds that we all live and work in are also part of a really interesting, complex, and important cycle worldwide. Watersheds also serve important habitats for a variety of creatures. So if we think about habitat as home, we also can think about the fact that home doesn't look or feel the same for most of us, and it doesn't look or feel the same for most of the creatures who are living in the watersheds. So healthy habitats are critical not just for the survival of those plants and animals, but also for the overall function of those watersheds and keeping those ecological processes going. So it's important for us to think about the fact that what looks and feels good to us humans is not necessarily what is needed or wanted by the plants and animals that happen to live in the watershed. So it's important to have that mental shift. Let's walk through a couple of natural watershed features that are found in healthy watersheds. So we have the upland area, which if you think back to our introduction to what is a watershed diagram, if you are thinking about the cupping your hands as an example, a micro example of a watershed, the upland is those kind of ridges, those higher areas that are serving as those dividing areas within watersheds. We also have a floodplain. So when you look at the stream channel there in the middle, the floodplain is basically where that water is going to kind of rise up and overflow when there's a large storm event. And having that floodplain there helps really kind of dissipate that energy and helps that water kind of slowly filter back into the soil and into the groundwater. We also have riparian zones, which we'll talk about more, but that's the area right next to the water body that's often vegetated and serves a variety of really important ecological functions. And of course, we have our stream channel, which is a little lower in the overall scheme of things, but kind of our focus here when we're talking about these different zones. So I mentioned the upland area and those higher elevation areas that form those boundaries or divides. They also provide important habitat and act as a stabilizer for the soils in those headwaters, minimizing the surface erosion and filtering some surface runoff. We also have floodplains that I mentioned, and this is a really important feature for after those large storm events to have that natural area for that water to overflow and dissipate and slowly sink back into the ground. And then again, the riparian buffer, which means of the river. And that's often non-cultivated vegetated land that touches or is immediately near a water body. It serves a variety of really important features, as I mentioned. So having that natural riparian area is important for maintaining the water temperature and preventing some of that possible thermal pollution. Those overhanging branches and trees are really important to a lot of fish and aquatic creatures. It helps provide shade. It also provides supplemental nutrients. You know, as those leaves and insects might fall into the water, they provide food for animals that are living in the stream. Its riparian buffers are also a really important transitional zone. You know, a lot of aquatic life kind of exists between the channel and the surrounding area. So having that kind of safe habitat for animals that you know rely on both the surrounding area and that water body is really important. It's critical for flood mitigation as well, as I mentioned, slowing down that flood water and helping to stabilize those stream banks. So hopefully, we'll talk a little bit more about this in the forestry section as well, but just realizing the importance of riparian areas, even in urban areas, you know, instead of mowing right up to the edge of a stream, recognizing that these riparian buffers really do provide a lot of benefit and ecological function in watersheds, and they can be aesthetic as well. So, of course, water bodies, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, but any stream, river, pond, lake, or estuary, or other collection of water. So those water bodies can be lotic, flowing, or lentic, non-flowing. And it's greatly affected by, you know, where that water is in the landscape, where it is in the topography, the slope, the soils, and vegetation. So just pulling some of those concepts together, these are a variety of pictures, different types of scenes that you might see in a watershed, and they all look different. But the more you start to understand the various plant and animal communities, you can kind of start to see the interrelation between the soil types, the topography and elevation, the types of plant communities that are found there, and therefore the types of animal communities that are found there. And of course, this all varies in relation to the topography, and where the water body happens to be within the watershed. So hopefully, as you learn more, you'll have an even greater appreciation for the different ecological functions of watersheds and how unique they are, based on a variety of interacting features. So we can think of streams in a couple different ways. There's stream orders, but there's also we can also think about how frequently water flows in streams. So ephemeral streams flow only in direct response to precipitation. So they may not be there all year round, but they'll appear immediately after a storm rain event. Those intermittent streams, a little bit lower down in the watershed, they flow for at least 30 days during parts of the year, and they may have a pretty well-defined channel, so a little more visible. Those perennial streams, even lower in the watershed, are collecting water from those ephemeral and intermittent streams, and they flow continuously during a normal year, and they have well-defined channels with little or no vegetation in the channels, indicating that there's more common flow. So if we think about stream order, going back up in the watershed, we have the headwater streams classified as first through third. And they're typically small. They have steep gradient with typically a fast flow and a little bit cooler temperatures. They might have a little more thick vegetation along their banks, a little more shade, to keep the water cooler. And there's also probably a decent amount of organic debris overhanging vegetation. They're primary sources of organic inputs in those headwater streams and provide the basis for the food pyramid involving microorganisms and invertebrates, et cetera, et cetera. So we also have those middle reach streams, moving down a little bit in the watershed, 4th through 6th classification. And they come from those headwater streams, but become a little larger with lower gradients. And as this, the kind of fast headwater streams, as they slow down a little bit, they become a little bit less oxygenated. So those smaller headwater streams converge to the larger stream channels and become wider, a little deeper, and they generally have those slower gradients. Photosynthesis is becoming increasingly important as the primary source of oxygen in those streams. Because the stream is wider, the organic input from leaves and bank debris is relatively less important than it is for those headwater streams. Our lower reach streams, 7th order and up, they're formed from the convergence of those other streams, and they create those deeper channels, slower moving water bodies with little vegetation on the banks. So oxygen in the water is a result primarily of photosynthesis occurring in the river channel, not due to physical mixing. So often these large channels carry a lot of sediment, and that can potentially be a little problematic. So the typical sequence of pools and riffles that would be found in those headwater and middle reach streams are probably not as common in those lower reach streams, although they might still be found. So now that you have a better idea of this, you can start to see how those stream orders will impact the types of creatures, aquatic creatures that can live and survive there, and how the vegetation might also differ depending upon where it is in the watershed. So the Cahaba is a 6th order stream and the Mississippi is a 10th order stream, just to give you a little context. So, did you know the 1st order streams flow year-round, do not have any tributaries? The 2nd order streams are formed by the union of the 1st order streams, and 3rd order streams are formed by the union of 2 2nd order streams, etc., etc. So all those higher order streams form when the 2 streams of a lower order join. I think that's a helpful way to remember it. Section 5. How does Alabama use watersheds? Alabama uses its watersheds and water resources in a variety of different ways. Alabama has 67 counties with almost 5 million people, all living within and relying on those 16 river subbasins that we talked about earlier. We use watersheds in a variety of ways for our human benefit, including drinking water consumption, recreation, transportation, industrial use, extraction of natural resources, ag, and commercial development. Alabama water withdrawals have actually more than doubled in Alabama since the 1960s. And that's something to be keeping in mind when preserving and protecting our water bodies in the future, that water usage may be based on land use or population density. Total Alabama withdrawals by sector in 2010 reported industrial, thermoelectric, and mining taking up about 88% of those withdrawals, with public supply and residential using only about 9%, while ag used only about 3%. By source in 2010, total Alabama water withdrawals were primarily from surface water, while just about 5% were withdrawn from groundwater. Although Alabama is really known for its plentiful and rich water resources, I think that we can clearly see it's a valuable resource worth preserving in Alabama for generations to come. So key points to take away. We've talked about a watershed. It's an area of land that flows across through and under the ground on its way to another body of water. We've talked about those watershed boundaries and how they transcend political or state boundaries, that they are natural boundaries. We've covered the water cycle and hydrology, as well as those watershed functions and features. And we've discussed how Alabama uses its watersheds for human purposes, like industrial use, drinking water, transportation, but that those watersheds also provide a number of uses for us in terms of maintaining healthy and well-functioning water resources.
There are 5 major categories of non-point source pollution that we will describe in greater detail in the following slides. First is sediment pollution. Sediment simply refers to the loose particles of clay, silt, and sand that are found in soil. When those sediments are carried off of the land by wind or water erosion, they become pollutants. In fact, sediment pollution is the top pollutant in Alabama by volume. Once sediment finds its way into our water bodies, it can block the light needed by aquatic plants, it can obstruct waterways, and smother aquatic habitat. Sediment will eventually settle to the bottom, filling in waterways. Some of the smaller, lighter particles can stay suspended for long periods of time, causing the water to be very turbid. Any activity that causes soil erosion and lacks proper management strategies to prevent the loose soil from making its way to our water bodies can cause this type of pollution. Some examples of these type of activities include poor farming practices, construction, development, mining, forest operations, dirt roads, and so forth. Areas that lack vegetation, keep soil in place, block wind and water, are susceptible to erosion. In Alabama, intense rainfall causes most of the soil erosion that contributes to sediment pollution. Next type of non-point source pollution we're going to discuss is nutrient pollution. By themselves, nutrients are not pollutants. In fact, they're vital to the survival of animals and plants. However, in excessive amounts, there are certain nutrients that can cause water problems. The main nutrients of concern are nitrogen and phosphorus. Both are found in animal and human waste and in fertilizers. Just as fertilizers on our gardens help our plants to grow, excess amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus that make their way into waterways stimulate the growth of aquatic plants. An overabundance of plant life can lead to eutrophication of water bodies. Eutrophication refers to the state of a water body that has had excessive growth of algae and weeds. This water is typically very cloudy, even resembling pea soup, if you will, at a time, green and thick. The explosion of algae and weed growth can have negative consequences on various aspects of water quality, including dissolved oxygen levels. You may have heard of an area called the dead zone or hypoxic zone in the Gulf of Mexico. Each summer, a large area of the Gulf of Mexico is completely void of life due to water pollution. This is greatly due to the fact that the Mississippi River drains nearly 40% of the continental U.S., including central farmlands. This drainage carries about 65 million tons of nitrogen pollution into the Gulf of Mexico each year. And that is what creates that dead zone. Let's talk a little bit about animal waste, or specifically our pet waste. If pet waste is not properly picked up and disposed of, it can lead to pollution, including nutrient pollution and the next type of non-point source pollution we're going to discuss, which is pathogen pollution. In fact, a single gram of dog feces contains 23 million fecal coliform, which is a type of bacteria that can be harmful to humans and can indicate the presence of pathogenic or disease-causing bacteria and viruses. So most bacteria are harmless and even important to life, but fecal bacteria can contain pathogens. Pathogenic bacteria and viruses can enter waterways from many sources, including poorly managed livestock operations, failing septic and sewer systems, wildlife, boat discharges, and even our family pet, as we heard earlier. If animal or human waste is washed into the water, it's possible the water can be contaminated with these pathogens. It can cause people to get sick. In addition to the health risk posed by pathogenic bacteria, as the bacteria decompose the organic matter in the water, the bacteria compete with other organisms for dissolved oxygen. If the levels of bacteria get too high, it's possible that they can deplete the dissolved oxygen levels to a point where it can cause harm to aquatic life or even large-scale fish kills. Another category of non-point source pollution is hazardous or toxic waste. This encompasses waste that has properties that make it harmful or dangerous to human health or the environment. It can come in many forms, including liquids, solids, gases, and sludge. Its sources can be industrial or household. A few specific examples of hazardous and toxic waste sources include landfills, junkyards, and other hazardous waste disposal, underground storage tanks, pesticides and herbicides, auto maintenance, road runoff, mining, boats and marinas. Pesticide is an example of a hazardous substance that is used in residential and agricultural settings. It can enter water bodies through runoff as well as spray drift, which occurs when wind blows a pesticide into a waterway as it is being sprayed onto an area of land. Unfortunately, once pesticides enter the water, they often decompose into more toxic compounds, increasing the threat to our environment. Many people do not consider pharmaceuticals and personal care products as causes of water pollution. However, they have been detected in over 80% of the waterways tested in the United States. The products end up in our waterways when people flush them down their toilets or pour them down the drains. And these products are not typically removed with traditional wastewater treatment. The effects on aquatic and human life are largely unknown. However, there is evidence of fish sex being altered when exposed to some compounds that mimic hormones. It's very important to dispose of personal products and pharmaceuticals properly. Did you know the EPA estimates that each American household generates 20 pounds of chemical waste each year, much of which is improperly disposed of and ends up in rivers, lakes, and aquifers? In an effort to control non-point source pollution, many communities have set up chemical waste collection programs to encourage the proper disposal of household chemicals. Learn how to properly dispose of chemical waste in your area.